Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist, and today I'm going to be talking with a colleague of mine who I just met a few minutes ago in our little pre-chat, but who I had heard on Bulletproof Radio with Dave Asprey. She was talking about Chinese herbal medicine, and as I was listening to just how eloquently she explained it, I knew that I wanted to reach out to her to have a similar conversation here on this show for this audience. And in the process of getting to know my guest today, Chloe Weber, there's a lot of directions this conversation could go in, from neurology to self-care to public health, and we're just going to see what develops. Chloe Weber is a licensed acupuncturist. She graduated with her master's in Oriental medicine from Southwest Acupuncture College, also the school I went to, but she went to the Boulder campus. And she was drawn to Chinese medicine as a way to address public health issues. After graduating, she founded a nonprofit sliding scale walk-in Chinese herb clinic called Urban Herbs. And running her clinic, she was able to really hone her study of herbs and delighted in her community outreach. When her son, Remy, was diagnosed with a rare and debilitating genetic disorder, she decided to combine the power of Chinese herbs and high-quality full-spectrum hemp and co-founded Radical Roots. So she has done a lot of really interesting things with the medicine, and I'm just delighted to see where this conversation leads today. Chloe Weber, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity.
Thanks so much for having me, Brody. I'm really excited to be here. And curious to see where the conversation goes as well.
Yeah, so much potential. So first off, I'm curious just to hear a little bit more about the sort of the public health aspect of your journey. What made you go the herbal route? I know a lot of acupuncturists will maybe open a community acupuncture clinic. Lots of people, this is of course pre-COVID, lots of people getting treated in the same room, with a very minimal intake and just using points on the hands and feet. But don't hear too much about kind of herbs to the masses. And so I'd love to just hear about that.
Absolutely. So, I was drawn to Chinese medicine in general because of the public health interest. So when I was in high school, I actually went on sort of like a outward bound trip to Costa Rica and developed a rare tropical disease called Cutaneous Leishmaniasis. So then that led me to ultimately study ecology and evolutionary biology in college. So I was always interested in medicine and how our lives and our actions interact with the environment and how that then plays a role in our health. So as I grew up and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with myself, I stumbled across Chinese herbs, and I'd done acupuncture before and started looking into what Chinese herbs had to offer and really looked at it and was understanding that this was really true public health. So instead of just masking the symptoms, Chinese herbs are such a beautiful, incredible system in which we can, look at the person, see where they're at right now, see what symptoms they're having, what their underlying predispositions are, and then tailor formulas specifically for that. So I really, really fell in love with the herbal system because it's just so safe and so effective and so versatile. So when I was in school, I was sort of looking at all the different programs and looking at how Chinese medicine is really, it's very expensive for a lot of people. Things are getting better in that way. But I really wanted to make it as accessible as possible and fell in love with this idea of doing a sliding scale herb clinic. And when I created that business, it really was just so much fun. It was so well received by the neighborhood. It was so exciting to see how people were responding to the herbs, especially because every single culture historically has some sort of connection to herbal medicine. It's sort of like every culture has a bone broth or a fermented food. They also have used some sort of herbal medicine. So it was cool having people walk in off the street into our herb clinic and ask questions about what the herbs were. And you could tie it back and say, didn't your grandma ever give you some mint tea for a stomach ache, or some ginger tea or something like that? And everybody would get this look on their face and get so excited. And so I'm an herb nerd to the max.
I love that. And interesting. And there's actually already a bunch of tangents I want to go off on. First of which is that my sister also had cutaneous leishmaniasis, and that
Shut up.
she had a job taking kids like around the world to do like service projects and kind of ecotourism and sustainability and that kind of thing. And she got it in Ecuador, I believe, and was treated like it's probably the kind of thing that if she had gotten diagnosed in like she might not even have gotten a diagnosis if she'd waited until getting back to the United States, but because it was Bolivia, somewhere in South America, when she was diagnosed with leishmaniasis. And I actually used a Chinese medicine protocol for the divergent meridians to help treat her. And that's sort of like one of those things where like you can either put something like leishmaniasis is like, it can migrate to your internal organs. It can be like a really bad situation. And it was like super gross on her skin. And the way that this particular protocol worked, it was like you treat 3 days on and then 3 days of rest. And then you go back to treating it 3 days in a row and then 3 more days of rest. And then again, 3 days in a row. And it was like that during the 3 days of treating, it would get like pussy and disgusting and like so much worse. And then on the days of leaving it alone, it would like seemingly get better. But it's this like process of like, of trying to bring to the surface something that could go latent. And by the time that she was done with her 9-day, like kind of off and on course of treatment with me, the tissue sample that she sent back to the CDC to get cultured was clean of leishmaniasis.
Stop it.
And I was super excited because it was one of those times where it's like, where do you put your trust, right? Do you like for real medicine? Do you go Western or, like, because this is my sister too, right? If something goes wrong with her, it's this is terrible. Obviously I would love my patients, but I probably wouldn't have taken such a risk with them because I would have been more cautious. And it really showed me the power of kind of these classical ways of thinking about disease. And I was treating her with primarily with acupuncture and essential oils. And I believe herbs were in there as well, but it was it was tapping into like particularly this set of channels that is meant to that combines the sort of the immune system, not when it's on the surface, but like when it's going to a deeper level in the body. So called
oh
divergence.
my God, we have to nerd out about this after this because I was on a chemotherapy for that. I mean, I was in high school, so I didn't know. I mean, I did acupuncture in high school, but I had no concept of what. So they put me on a chemo, which was actually made of pentostam. So another sidetrack. My son Remy, when I did heavy metal testing for him a couple of years ago, when he was probably like 3 or 4, it showed that his antimony was off the charts. And that I figured out after a little bit, I was like, how does his antimony so high? I figured out that the chemotherapy that I was on for leishmaniasis was made of antimony. And I detoxed it into him like 16 years later when I actually had him. So, but I really want to hear your treatment protocol for that because that's amazing.
Well, and antimony is one of the leishmaniasis. Yeah, like that was, I'm remembering that now. It's been a long time. But yes, to the idea that Chinese herbal medicine and Chinese medicine in general gives us this very elegant alternative and something that isn't like, it's not an either or situation. It can be a both and situation. And I love what you said about how that every single culture has a connection to herbal medicine. Herbs are basically just strong food, right? That there's all food has different nutrients, different nourishing properties, and herbs, generally speaking, have stronger tastes. A lot of times it's like, and in Chinese medicine, each of the tastes has a different function in the body, and that a lot of times you can tell generally what an herb does by how it tastes. I'd love to just get into some of some of the principles like that that go along with Chinese herbal medicine and how it's different than kind of the one herb per one condition that is often the case with Western herbalism.
Yeah, so Chinese herbs are so interesting in that we do formulas, obviously. So we're using different herbs in conjunction. So I sort of look at it as a song or, it's a symphony. Some people have referred to it as that. So it's like these different herbs have their own action and they come together and they're really helping support the body in different ways. So we sort of classify our herbs in terms of their action. So some can clear phlegm, some will clear heat. Most of them are working on either sort of clearing a pathogenic factor, which can be internally or externally derived. So like wind per se, wind is a pathogenic factor in Chinese medicine. And so if you have an external invasion of wind, we often correlate that to like a cold or a flu. But you can also have internally derived wind, which is typically thought to be some sort of a neurological disorder. That could be epilepsy, anything where there's a tic or a tremor. But so basically, the herbs are either used to clear a pathogenic factor or to boost and support the system. So either boosting the qi, boosting the blood, the yin, the yang, so that you're really nourishing the body, which is something that's so common these days because we are so very run down as a culture, which I know is something you talk about a lot.
Yes.
So we sort of look at the body, we find where the body is weak, the system's weak, and what sort of pathogenic factors are going on, where the disharmony is, and then we use these herbal formulas. So basically, we typically have a chief or two chief herbs. So those are the main herbs that are addressing the main ailment or issue or symptom that you're trying to address. And then we have these other supporting herbs that come after that.
So you're talking about the anatomy of a formula in Chinese medicine, where we've got
Yes.
a chief herb or maybe two co-chief herbs that are basically like the ones that are doing the main job of the formula. And then what are the other players in a formula?
So we have the deputy, which are the herbs that come sort of after that. So they're supporting the other factors. So in Chinese medicine, it's sort of how the elements work together. So I don't know how much you've gone into this with your show, but each element has a correlation with a different taste, a different flavor, a different emotion. You know, we really look at that, and we look at the body as a microcosm of the universe. So it's really how the elements are working together. You don't want too much of any one thing. So you want to find that balance. And so that's what we're doing with the formula. So say you have liver cheese stagnation. I'm sure I know you've talked about this on the show with Stacy.
Yep.
So
yep. And to refresh people's memories, liver qi stagnation is oftentimes our shorthand for stress. Liver qi is supposed to like flow freely in the body, and when it doesn't is when we start to feel tight and tense and stressed with the shallow breath and the tight neck and shoulders and the frequent sighing and the issues with timing like insomnia or irregular periods or irritable bowel syndrome or just the migraines. There's all sorts of things that can derive from specifically liver qi not flowing the way that it should. Go on.
Exactly. It's like 99% of our population this year.
Yeah.
So basically, one of our most classical formulas is Xiaoyasan. So that's free and easy wanderer. And the main action of that formula is to move the liver qi. So we're working on the liver in that, but on the other side of the liver and very closely connected is your digestion. So as you're saying, you can develop irritable bowel, alternating stool, constipation, diarrhea. You can get that bloating and gas, that monkey mind at night where you can't sort of turn off your brain. So that's sort of the digestive aspect of it. So you want to move the liver qi, but you also want to support the digestion because that's sort of the secondary issue.
And that's something that in Chinese medicine we think about a lot, is that not only where is the problem now, but where is the problem going to be if we don't address it? There's a real emphasis on prevention in Chinese medicine that we think about. And so not only is it like, okay, this person is having digestive symptoms, but if the real root is the fact that their life has no rhythm to it, or that they constantly feel like there's not enough time, or that they're under constant stress, if we don't treat the liver, our attempts at shoring up what we call the spleen and stomach or the digestive system are going to be of minimal effect.
Exactly. And so what's so beautiful about Chinese herbal formulas is that we're able to really harmonize the herbs. We're able to look at the action. So a lot of times you'll talk to people, especially if you have a patient or if you are somebody who is close with a pharmacist, who will look at a list of herbs in a formula and they'll say, well, this herb can cause liver damage. So that may be true, but normally the research studies on single herbs are really high extracts of a single herb. In Chinese herbal formulation, we're looking at sort of harmonizing the whole formula. So it's you're getting smaller amounts of each herb, so those toxic effects are mitigated, but we're also looking at different herbs that are going to mitigate any of those potentially negative effects. So it's very rare to have side effects, negative side effects from Chinese herbs. It happens, but it's very
Right.
rare.
Yeah. And that's actually another of the parts of the formula, right? Is that there's somebody there's an herb friend in a formula whose job it is to mitigate the potentially harsh side effects of sort of the main ingredients. And that's one of the reasons I think that Chinese medicine is such an elegant, it's these recipes that where that, yeah, like if you were to give somebody like a bag of baking soda and a bag of salt and a bag of sugar and a bag of flour and say like take each of these things, like essentially it's like cake mix or cookie mix or something like that, like, but it's going to be horrible, and the body, and if you mix it together, it's going to be so much, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There's an alchemy that takes place. And so, and like, yes, to what you just said about that, for example, licorice is an herb that we have in like what, 3/4 of all of our formulas have a little bit of licorice in there to make everything work together, to harmonize the formula, as we call it. But it's like, yeah, licorice is not a good situation, in high doses, especially for people with high blood pressure. It's like, that's something to be concerned about. But a lot of times it's like, the amount that you're getting, usually if someone's going to have a side effect, it's because either it's completely the not right diagnosis, or they're allergic to it, or because someone's prescribing something in a very high dose.
Exactly. So that's, it's been really beautiful to see herbs in action, having I started my pharmacy right out of school, and it was absolutely terrifying the first time somebody walked in. So a lot of acupuncturists are pretty nervous about prescribing herbs, let alone prescribing raw herbal formulas. But it really just threw me into, you've got to have faith in the medicine and trust your teachers and study your ass off and
Yeah.
figure it out. And, it really did show me just how safe and effective Chinese herbs are. And it's been such a fun exploration over the past couple of years, just getting to know them better and learning different ways to use them.
And I'm curious, back in those days, were there particular kinds of conditions that you were seeing a lot of?
Huh. Well, so that clinic was actually in Five Points in Denver. So the focus was really trying to get Chinese herbs to people who didn't have access to them. So it was predominantly a lower income neighborhood. And a lot of the patients that I saw were on multiple meds, which made it really tricky in terms of the farm actions, because we've got to double check all of the pharmacological actions with the herbs and make sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's, which, if you're doing herbs, you know that. So I saw a lot of patients with high blood pressure. I saw a lot of patients with autoimmune diseases, and a lot of GI patients. I mean, it's really astounding how many gastrointestinal patients I would see. And really, it's something that I've become very passionate about, because I truly see how much gut health is the foundation of health. And so many people have talked about this throughout history. We have Li Dongwan, who wrote the Spleen and School of the Spleen and Stomach, and really went into how digestion is the heart of all health. So that, I feel like, is a really interesting book, because he talks about how our essence needs to be replenished by the essence of the spleen and stomach. So if you're not optimizing your digestion, then you're not going to feel as good as possible. You're not going to live as vital of a life as possible. And it also then goes into sort of the immunological functions of the digestive tract. So it's really amazing to think that so many of these herbalists had this awareness of how important the gut was to our vitality, to our immune system, and to our health way back when. And I wish that as a society we had taken that into consideration before we dumped millions and millions of pounds of glyphosate on everything.
Yeah, that was my next question, is that like treating digestive disorders with herbs can be challenging, because yeah, you can't use what you can't digest. And if people are going to be eating less than optimal diets a lot of times, because the food that's least expensive is like kind of cheap, crappy food that's made artificially, like made artificially inexpensive. And that's precisely like that in and of itself is an obstacle to deal with. Did you do dietary counseling with folks at that point, or were you simply giving them herbs and hoping for the best?
No, definitely. I do a lot of dietary. I mean, well, I just personally love food a disgusting amount. I joke that I have obsessive compulsive eating disorder, but no, I really love food. And I think that that's really the foundation of herbal medicine and again, one of the reasons I fell in love with it. So a lot of times I would talk to patients, and also I was a very broke just after graduating bootstrapping entrepreneur at the time. So it was easy for me to come up with recipes that would help my patients be able to optimize their gut and also optimize their dollar. But, I'd really start patients with, okay, so once a week, you're going to roast a chicken and you're going to make a bone broth. And here are a couple herbs you're going to put in that bone broth. And that's where we're going to start. And then maybe we might work into some fermented food, depending on what's going on and what their histamine levels are and just sort of how they're responding to things. But bone broth was always one of the places that I would start. But diet, I think, is so important, and healing the gut lining and being able to process those foods, as you're saying. So then I would sort of add the herbs in incrementally as their gut seemed to be functioning a little bit better and a little bit better. And then once we got the digestion going, then we could start looking at some of the other symptoms. And it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you got to deal with other symptoms first and then go to the digestion. But so many times, especially with autoimmune disorders or chronic fatigue, the gut is a great place to start.
This episode is brought to you by the coaching division at brodywelch.com. Could a 5 to 10 minute daily practice and 5 phone conversations really change your life? They did for my client Amanda, a high-powered doctor, mother, and activist who is struggling with chronic stress and low self-worth. She sorely needed time to meditate, exercise, make art, and just enjoy herself, but she felt guilty for saying no. She invested in my Getting Unstuck package and experienced a massive upgrade. She writes, "It's still mind-blowing to me how starting with little actions, for me the 5 to 10 minute breathing exercises and meditation, made such palpable differences. That made things like eating better, taking breathing breaks throughout the day, and exercising easier. Inexplicably though, that resulted in less comparison, less caring of what other people think of me, and more self-worth. That I was not expecting. In retrospect now, it makes perfect sense how you connected everything. I know that if I get sucked back into the urgency of the world and its expectations of me, that I will find my way back. I still love calling out, oh, there's that wood element again, when I rush to complete something despite being exhausted." See, there's a connection between how we take care of ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. I have a framework that can help. Yes, you do still have to do the work, but it might well be faster, easier, and more potent than you can ever imagine. Visit brodywelch.com/coaching, or just write to me at brody@brodywelch.com, that's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH, and start getting unstuck today. And why bone broth in particular, if you could just fill that out for us?
So bone broth has just a ton of amino acids and it has a lot of glycine as one of the amino acids, but it has a lot of collagen. That's what I'm looking for.
Yes.
Which helps the gut lining and helps heal tight junctions and sort of helps replenish the gut. So the gut lining is really only like one cell thick. So once you're eating foods that are inflammatory, sometimes foods are going to leak through that gut lining, get into the rest of your body. Your immune system sees it as an invader, can freak out. So what we want to do is we want to soothe that, calm the inflammation, so that collagen sort of creates a protective coating, helps seal that up so that you can then actually process your foods, reduce your inflammation, calm your immune response, and start moving forward into that healing process.
Thanks for filling that out for us. And for people who can't, or like for whom bone broth is difficult to digest, does that give us a clue as to what might be going on?
Yeah, definitely. It can be a couple of things. One of the things that I've started with patients who have a hard time with bone broth, sometimes I'll just start them on a stock or even like a vegetable stock. A lot of times mineral deficiency is something that I also see pretty regularly. And if you look at the mineral quality of our soil and thus our foods and our vegetables and even our meats, it's significantly decreased from what it was even 50, 60 years ago. So we do see a lot of mineral deficiency in our society. So getting a really good vegetable broth into people is a great way to start so that they're still able to start getting some of those minerals in there. And then you can work them up into, sort of a bone stock and then into a bone broth.
And these are things that are easy to digest, like, because they're warm and cooked. And like the closer something is to 100-degree soup, the easier it is going to be processed by our systems. And so, yeah, like, I love starting with broths, soups, stews, things like that for people that are having that digestive issue. And plus it's just comforting. And a lot of times if people are stress eating, or if stress is a piece of it, then that can in and of itself be a good thing to add. Back to Li Dong Yuan, who was creating these recipes, these herbal recipes from kind of this earth school of Chinese medicine here at the Treatise on the Spleen and Stomach, about 900 years ago or so?
I think it was around like 1250 AD.
Yeah. Okay. So so 800 years ago, 750. And even back then, they were hip to the gut-brain axis, which is, of course, something we're learning more and more about, and sort of the connection between the spleen and the mind. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about the gut-brain axis and its importance in neurological disorders and developmental disorders, in psychological disorders, like just all of that.
Oh my God. So the gut-brain axis is one of the things that I love to study. It's so fascinating. So my son Remy has a genetic disorder called SDXBP1. So this disorder affects how his neurons communicate. It's super duper rare, and all of the top experts have no idea what they're doing with it. So it's really been on me to sort of do a lot of research, and it's been fascinating to watch him. He's such an interesting patient. So I've learned so much about developmental disorders, and really you're always going to see an issue in the gut when you have a developmental disorder, or pretty much any neurological disorder. I treat a lot of Parkinson's and MS as well, and there's always a connection to the gut. So the gut is connected to the brain through the vagus nerve, as well as other different mechanisms, but that's one of the main ways that the gut communicates with the brain. So with Remy, what's been fascinating and absolutely horrifying is that he will have seizures with the full moon, which there's one lurking very soon. So I'm sort of holding my breath right now. So he has seizures with the full moon. So I did a ton of research into it. And the only thing that really made sense was that parasites migrate with the moon cycles.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah, that is so, yeah. And parasites in Chinese medicine would have been referred to as the ghosts, right? The gui, the ghosts or parasites. They're the goo or the gui, the ghosts or the parasites, the things that make us act erratically. And
totally. The lunacy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So when the parasites migrate for Rem, which it's funny because I was studying in China like right before I got pregnant and ate all of the street food. So when the parasites migrate, since Remy's already sort of wired to seize, like most of the children with his disorder have what's called like catastrophic epilepsy or intractable epilepsy. It's very poorly treated by Western medicine. So when those parasites cause more inflammation, that inflammation seems to travel along the vagus nerve to the brain, and then Remy will have seizures for a couple of days. Not consistently, but he'll have seizures for a couple of days, and then it'll go away. So then I'll do parasite cleanses on him, and it'll sort of go away for a couple months. I have 3 pets, so I haven't gone the path to parasite cleanse them also, which I think is ultimately what I have to do. But it's been really fascinating to see it happen in real life. Actually, Remy will have seizures at I sleep with him. He'll wake up at 5 a.m. He'll have a seizure, and then he'll have a bowel movement, a really gnarly one. And so in Chinese medicine, we also have a clock that says what time the organs are sort of most active. And in Chinese medicine, 5 a.m. is the large intestine. And I've seen it happen at least 10 times, where literally 5 a.m. on the dot, he will have a seizure and a bowel movement. And like every time my Chinese medicine brain is like, how did they know?
That is amazing.
But yeah, so the vagus nerve is very interesting in terms of how it regulates the brain and how it regulates the gut. One of the main treatments for epilepsy, if you have intractable epilepsy, is vagal nerve stimulation. And actually, I read an interesting research study about using, I think it was 10 hertz frequency on the vagus nerve acupuncture point in the ear in order to stimulate the vagus nerve to calm seizures. And it seemed like it was a small study, but it seemed like a really effective treatment protocol. So I think that could be interesting. Again, if you're looking at Chinese medicine from the public health perspective, you can before you do a surgery on a kid to see if this surgery and surgical intervention is going to help them and their epilepsy, why don't you do a little stimulation on the vagus nerve in the ear, see if they respond to that. If they do, they're probably going to be more likely to respond to the surgery. So that's just a side note of the tangent. But the vagus nerve is really interesting. I've gotten into CBD a lot, obviously, because I started the company in order to make Remy his own CBD, because I just kept trying all these one-size-fits-all products. And one of the things I studied a lot was how CBD affects the gut. So I find that really interesting. And I think that that's one of the main ways that CBD actually does help with epilepsy, because it potentiates specific bacteria, especially this one, Akkermansia monophilia. I probably always say that wrong. But that
I doubt many people are going to be able to correct you. So we'll just go with it.
It's one of the hot bacterias when you get into like the super nerdery, but it's been researched in terms of the keto diet potentiates this one bacteria. I'll not say it again, but the keto diet was developed for epilepsies. And this bacteria has also been shown to help in MS. So I think that that's one of the ways that CBD helps with the brain. Also, it helps with closing tight junctions in the gut, helping regulate the immune system. And then it also we have receptors for CBD and cannabinoids along the vagus nerve. So it helps regulate the vagus nerve as well. So it's really a cool herb and really, really fascinating. So that's fun.
And in your formulas with CBD, are you combining it with Chinese medicine?
Yeah. So we do raw herbs from Springwind and combine them with complete spectrum hemp from a farm nearby that's like beautifully biodynamically grown and all the goodness.
Are there caveats for people who are maybe out there thinking like, okay, that they might suspect that they have a gut brain axis issue that could be potentially helped in this situation? Is this something that people can play around with on their own, or something that you would recommend that they work with a practitioner on?
Just gut health in general, or with CBD?
With CBD specifically.
CBD is very safe overall, and really well tolerated. I think it's important that you get a high quality product, obviously. So one of the things about hemp that's really dangerous as an herbalist to watch it sort of blow up as it has is that hemp really pulls out any toxins that are in the earth. So it's great because it's actually helping us save the earth when it's farmed responsibly. But it also means that any toxins that are being sprayed nearby or that are in the ground are going to be pulled up into your plants and then put into your CBD oil or however you're taking it. So you want to make sure that you're sourcing from a place that has, certificates of analysis that are really visible and very transparent. So you can go to the website and see those. So that's the main concern for me as an herbalist when it comes to CBD. Besides that, it's pretty safe and very well tolerated to play around with. But, I typically, I like to start as low as possible and then increase incrementally, like every week, every other week, to see how you're feeling and how you respond to it.
That makes a lot of sense. And then in general, I mean, in terms of Chinese herbal medicine, that same question is like, I really don't recommend that people just guess what's going on with their gut health, because whether we need to be eliminating kind of the turbid excess that we call dampness, whether we need to be kind of sloughing that off, or whether we need to be nourishing a deficiency, are there going to be very different herbs and very different things. And certainly, and same thing with even probiotics, right? There is, it's not necessarily a one size fits all scenario.
Definitely. Well, and that's, I know many Chinese herbalists and Chinese medicine practitioners that I know, like that's what we love so much about this medicine and about the human body is it's constantly challenging, it's constantly changing, and we're always going to be pushed to learn more and more. So if you are looking for help with a health condition, come to one of us who have dedicated our lives to studying it so that you can optimize that and not waste your time. You can get back to doing the things that you love just as much as we love doing our job.
Yes. It's amazing to me how much money people will drop at like a health food store guessing, right? As opposed to coming to somebody who knows this stuff, loves it, and would love to help make it more efficient, faster, and more personal. So you have a bunch of different formulas that you've created to help with. We just talked about the one that helps with the liver and spleen axis. You have other formulations. Is that at Radical Roots Herbs?
Yeah, we have formulas at Radical Roots Herbs. I tried to, so with that line, my passion, what I think works best with Chinese herbs is obviously customizable formulas, from a practitioner as you're going. And that's the gold standard in our medicine. That being said, I do think that there's also functionality. And until we're able to get customized herbs to the market, and in a mass way, and people are willing to drink customized herbs, then, I try to make formulas that, are able to be taken off the shelf with very little risk and that address the ailments that somebody's looking for. So like with CBD, so our initial line was 5 different products for CBD. So we had the Remy's Revenge, which is our neurological disharmony formula, which is really a wind formula. It's it's made for my son, so it clears heat, which you'll see in seizures a lot. You'll see kids will sweat a ton at their head. So it anchors that wind. It clears some phlegm. It moves the blood a little bit, cools the blood a little bit, nourishes the yin a little bit. So I really love that formula. I think it's beautifully balanced. But then we did like a rest and relax. We tried to make it as simple as possible in terms of the naming. But so that formula, basically we looked at the various different ways, the different patterns in Chinese medicine that end up resulting in like insomnia or sort of that spirit disharmony. So it's sort of a modified Swanzhao Rentong. So we're calming the heart, but then we also added some herbs that are going to help cool some heat and just calm the shen, nourish the heart, nourish the blood. And so that's a formula that I feel like we made them all so that they're as palatable as possible in terms of being able to take off the shelf, but also very effective.
And I'd like to just, I don't know much about your herb line, but it reminds me that there's a difference between something that is just simply like you take the herbs, you make a tea out of it, you dehydrate it and form it into little pills and give it to somebody versus concentrating it down to get what we think are the most significant components of the herbs. Are yours more concentrated, or are they more are they extracts, or are they simply just the herbs themselves?
So our herbs are actually spagyric extraction. So they're really, really cool.
What's that?
It's super nerdy goodness. So I found this brilliant physicist chemist who lives up in the mountains in Colorado. And he so they tincture the herbs. So we tincture all of the Chinese herbs together. And then they take the herbs from the tincture. So the tincture is looked at as the spirit of the plant. We take all the herbs out of the tincture and then they burn it for like 8 hours. And then from the ashes, they use water to reconstitute all the minerals and salts that are in the plant. And that's considered the body of the plant. And so when they put it back together, you see this crazy chemical reaction. And, in terms of spirituality, it's this, you're bringing the body and the spirit back together, and it's this whole woo-woo magical goodness, but also chemically you see this incredible reaction. So it's been really cool because I've, as I said, I've played around with all of the herb products. I take all of the herbs, but these have really created herbal products that I haven't, of the efficacy that I've never used before. And potentially especially for hemp, it's really interesting because since hemp is such a mineral rich plant, those minerals are important coenzymes to potentiate the actions of the hemp. So it's really been amazing for our hemp line. We just started a couple of products without hemp in it, and I've been blown away at how much stronger they are than granules or even raw herbs. So it's been fun.
I love the symbolism there of the bringing the body and the spirit of the plant back together in order to catalyze a change for people. I think that's super cool. I feel like that's reason enough, and amazing also that you notice that that there's a potency that comes through there. And I understand that you have a coupon for our listeners for 20% off with code Healthy Curiosity. And so I appreciate and thank you in advance for that. If anyone is interested, these will all be in the show notes. Before we wrap up here, I wanted to just pivot a little bit because I feel like this herb stuff I could continue to nerd out with you for hours, but we have busy lives, and you especially as a single mom with to a kid with disabilities, we know the importance of self-care in order to be able to show up and do your best work as a parent and as a practitioner. And since self-care is a passion of mine, I would love for you to share what works for you as far as self-care. What are your go-to practices?
Well, my motto is kind of something is better than nothing. So we all kind of want to be perfect. We all want to do everything. I know for me, I put a tremendous amount of pressure on myself to figure out how to support my son as best as humanly possible because he's just the light of my life. And that weighs on you a lot when you're a parent with special needs, a parent of a child with special needs. But you also have to accept that this life is imperfect, and I think that, to me, every little bit of self-care helps. So if it's meditating for 2 minutes, if it's taking the time to actually take a shower, or throwing around a kettlebell for 5 minutes, every little bit of self-care really makes a big difference. And I think it's important for us to accept the journey and sort of move imperfectly in the direction of our goals, as opposed to saying we're going to change everything today and meet these unattainable standards, especially today while we're all, like I live a pretty extreme momming situation. I have a lot on my plate day to day, but really our entire society does, like we're really not meant to live under these circumstances in which we are just under chronic stress. 2020 alone, but even before that, we're working way too much. We're not in touch with nature. We're not in touch with ourselves or joy, or, I see so many people, and patients, and I'm sure you see it too, who are just so burnt out. And, so I think it's sort of accepting that this really isn't how we're supposed to live our lives, and making those small steps towards sort of reclaiming yourself and doing that through self-care and self-love, and knowing that it's not going to be an easy or perfect journey. And some days, you might be on the floor with a glass of wine, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, it sounds like self-compassion is in there, is in the mix there too.
Definitely.
And really, like, the people that, not only is it the importance of these little tiny habits, right? Making the most of 5 minutes to breathe, to exercise, to move, that all of that does add up, as you were saying. But so does giving yourself credit for doing those things. Because if you're still going to not count it, then it can reinforce the sense that you're not doing enough. And so I encourage people, like, yes, do the things, and also notice that you're doing the things, because that actually ends up contributing to your sense of agency of like, oh yeah, I reclaimed this for myself, as opposed to life is still this big overwhelming slog.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's so important. And it's, I think it's just little by little, and then also the more you can work in these habits, they become part of who you are. Like I just don't eat certain things, like I
Yeah.
just always eat well. Like good food is very important to me, and I enjoy it, and I probably should take more time to eat slowly and do that whole thing. But
Wow, do we have a lot in common? Yeah, and it's really, yes, to the fact that, like, we taking the time to nourish ourselves and to eat good food, and to, like, just decide that, recognizing that over time these are what help move the needle on the way that makes me feel good and makes me feel my best, as opposed to like eating the sugary, crappy thing and then feeling the consequences of it and then regretting it and then feeling bad about yourself. It's like you can just short circuit that whole thing by
Totally.
yeah.
And then if you fall off the wagon and have some chocolate, then like
Yeah,
that's okay. Tomorrow's another day. Like it doesn't have to, like we have to also just
exactly.
be, it's again like self-compassion. Like be
Right.
kinder to yourself. Like we need to think about how we criticize ourselves and remember that like that's not how we would ever talk to somebody else.
Yes,
And have more compassion. We're all going through a lot. This is a
exactly.
challenging world that we're living in. More and more challenging every day at the moment.
Yes. Exactly. And that's exactly it, right? Treating ourselves the way that we would want someone that we love to treat themselves is such the heart of it, for me at least. And if you're going to go for the chocolate, celebrate the fact that you're choosing it and not feel guilty in the least about it. That's also
100%.
yeah, because again, getting back, bringing it all the way back around to the liver and spleen axis, right? If you're if you're going to stress about something, you are making it worse for your digestive process and your ability to handle it. So, Chloe Weber, I so appreciate your time. I know you've got a lot of irons in the fire, and being able to hear and learn from you about your journey and what you've done with Chinese medicine and trying to make it more accessible to other people. I will have links to everything really that we talked about in the show notes over at brodywelch.com or wherever you get your podcasts. I so appreciate you joining me today. Is there any last little tidbit that you'd like to throw out there for our listeners?
I'm sure there's plenty, but I'm still just so dumbfounded by the leishmaniasis situation. But yeah, I mean, just, everybody just be kind to yourselves and to each other. This is such a hard time. And, the more we can spread love and health and vitality, the better. So I'm really grateful for what you're doing and spreading knowledge and helping empower people. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, we are in this together. Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.